Thank you, Susan. I am very pleased to introduce best-selling author Randi Minetor, who writes the Bird Finding and Best Easy Bird Guides series for Falcon Guides, Globe Pequot Press, and is the author of Backyard Birding and Butterfly Gardening for Lions Press. Her most recent work, The Complete Language of Birds, is an encyclopedia that unites classic illustrations, science, folklore, and mythology about more than 400 bird species around the world. She writes for Birding Magazine and North American Birds and serves as president of the Rochester Birding Association. Welcome, Randi.
Thank you so much, Becky and Susan and Andy and everybody there. I'm very excited to have this opportunity to talk with you all. I'm just going to share my screen here so that we can jump right into this, really. The Complete Language of Birds is a book that came to me sort of out of the blue from a publisher I'd never worked with before, called Quarto Publishing, and it was eventually uh, published by their imprint Wellfleet Press. They came to me because another author had started this book and then decided it was just too hard, and she gave it up. And they came to me, saying, "Oh my God, this is in our schedule. Can you get it done in 6 months?" So researching 400 bird species over the course of 6 months became more than a full-time job, as I'm sure you can imagine. But we got it done, and this book is the result. So I am delighted to be able to share some of these many very ancient stories that in which birds played a critical role in the creation of the world and in many other aspects of our lives. So let's jump right in here. In the beginning, there was a goose. This goose, in fact, an Egyptian goose, and at the time, the only being in the universe. Egyptians called this goose Gengen Ware, or the Great Honker. This goose carried and protected the egg that, when hatched, would produce all of the life on Earth. But another being actually laid this egg, Jeb, god of Earth, also known by the nickname Great Cackler. Whether or not Jeb was actually a goose himself is subject to interpretation, but when he evolved into human form over the centuries, he often wore an Egyptian goose or another bird as part of his headdress. Right now, the one we have here, maybe a lesser blackback gull, very hard to say. But Egypt's creation story includes the third being, Amun, Lord of the Thrones, who also liked to take the form of a goose, as you can see in this very ancient petroglyph. In fact, the legend says that Amun's goose cry of victory over his adversaries became the very first sound heard by the people on Earth. And to commemorate this, Amun is known as the Great Shrieker. So Jeb laid a golden egg that contained the sun. Gengen Ware incubated and hatched the egg that brought all other beings into existence. I'm sorry, lost my place there for a second. And Amun's goose presence scared off all the early adversaries. So the result was, well, let there be light. Who knew that a goose could be so powerful? Meanwhile, down at the southern tip of Africa, a whole other creation was going on. The indigenous Khoisan people tell the story of their creator, a god called Swi-Gob, who ignited a great fire to bring all of the traits of the animals out of the ether and into reality. He gathered all of these traits and he baked them into all kinds of animal shapes. And as he did this, a Cory bustard, a very large bird with very broad wings, served as his helper. The Cory bustard fanned the flames continuously with his wings, keeping the fire burning until all of the animals were fully baked. Kind of gives new meaning to Christmas cookies, doesn't it? And meanwhile, in a wonderful Aboriginal legend from Australia, all life began in the dark, skulking its way around the earth as best it could. And the spirits of the sky spent part of an eternity deciding how they would bring light into the world. They built a huge pile of sticks that they planned to ignite, but they didn't want to frighten all of the beings on the ground by suddenly producing this big burst of light. So one day, an emu named Dinawan and a brolga named Bralach sat side by side on their nests, protecting their eggs in the dark. And as they talked about the children they would bring into the world soon, they began to argue about whose children would be stronger and whose would be more clever, like any two pregnant women might be. The discussion became more and more heated, and finally, Brala grabbed one of Dinawan's eggs in her bill and used all of her fury and her strength to throw it as high as she could into the sky. And so high did it go that it collided with the huge pile of sticks the spirits had collected. The egg broke open, the yolk spilled over the sticks. Somehow that kindled them into a great bonfire. The sky lit up, bathed the earth in light, and it showed everyone just how beautiful Australia was. Now, from that day forward, the spirits decided that they would build a great fire every morning to light up the earth and let it burn until evening. But they still worried that the transition to light every day would frighten the animals. So they searched for one animal who could call to everyone every morning before they lit the fire to let them know that the light was on its way. And what animal did they choose? Well, if any of you have been birding in Australia, you know it's the laughing kookaburra, who was only too happy to volunteer to play this very important role. And to this day, this devoted bird wakes up an entire continent by calling just before sunrise. Now, after the birds helped get the world up and running, they continued to play pivotal roles in the early days of the Earth. One of the big surprises for me in my research for this book was the sheer number of cultures around the world that record a great flood in their origin stories. We all know the story of Noah and the ark, and that as the waters began to recede once the 40-day flood stopped, Noah released first a raven and then a dove to see if they would find land. The raven never came back, suggesting perhaps that it found some nice waterlogged carrion to munch on and forgot all about Noah and his ark. But the dove felt more of a duty to Noah for saving her life, so it brought back an olive leaf, and this meant that the land had begun to emerge from the water. Well, other cultures tell this story a little differently. In some areas of the United States, Christians associate the painted bunting with the rainbow that God sent to Noah as a sign of his covenant with the earth. Painted buntings, of course, are the living embodiment of the rainbow, which reminds us that God protects us and will not destroy his creation again. In the Biracek area of Turkey, however, people believe that Noah released a northern bald ibis, of all things, from the ark, a bird they see as a symbol of fertility to guide the repopulation of the earth. Now, the Athabascans of Alaska believe that the Great Flood came to an end with the help of the American bittern. The bittern swallowed enormous amounts of water, flew to where the water was needed most, and regurgitated it to form all kinds of new rivers, like these braided rivers that you find that are so beautiful in Alaska. Now, an Ojibwa legend tells us that long ago, the Creator sent a great flood to purify the world and drown out all the evil. But one man, Wayne Abuju, worked quickly and built himself a raft, so he managed to keep himself and just a few animals afloat for an entire month as they waited for the water to recede. But the water wouldn't go down. So they summoned several different birds to dive to the bottom of the sea, or yeah, to the bottom of the water, and see if they could bring up just a little bit of earth to restart the earth, to restart the world. Well, the common loon seemed like the perfect thing to do this, but it tried and failed. And the dove volunteered, but as you might imagine, that didn't go so well, and the poor thing nearly drowned. So finally, a lone coot took on the challenge without telling anyone what he intended. So time passed before the other birds even noticed he was gone. But then, when they started looking for him, they finally found him floating behind the raft, unconscious, but still breathing. And sure enough, when they started to resuscitate him, they found that little bit, that little morsel of earth between within his bill. The coot had saved them, and Buju could restart the continent. It's worth noting that many other Native American legends tell the same story, but with a different waterfowl as the hero. In the Algonquin culture, for example, it's a merganser who brings up the morsel of earth by using its strong feet to push off from the raft and drive itself downward, and that sharp red bill to dig up some earth and bring it back. Meanwhile, according to a Maori legend in New Zealand, the god Tawaki, who makes lightning and thunder, caused the flood when he created the crystal floor of heaven. The crystal floor caused all of the water in the sky to gather and fall in one place, right on Fiordland, where the Fiordland penguins live. So this area receives some of the most torrential rain in New Zealand to this day. So the Fiordland penguins have actually been credited with making the rain fall and perhaps assisting Tawaki in creating that great flood. And in the jungles of Panama, the Great Flood serves as an origin story for the great tinamou, this dun-colored bird that's after the flood, the sun returned and a rainbow appeared, and the great tinamou, which blends right in with the surrounding foliage, saw the rainbow, and the intense colors frightened this bird half to death. It flew away from all of the other animals and retreated into the murkiest part of the forest, where it lives to this day, shunning color in favor of darkness. So these are just a few of the flood-related stories I found where birds play some kind of starring role. But these amazing birds have many more lessons to teach us throughout the world's folklore and mythology. Before I started working on the complete language of birds, I really had not thought much about how birds uh, figured into ancient civilizations and what they must have represented to people who were just amazed by the fact that they could fly. We take so much knowledge for granted now, but there was once a time when people really knew very little science about birds' habits and behavior. So when these people looked at the world around them and all the things they couldn't explain, they filled in some of the gaps with birds and the amazing things they could do. So here's one of my favorite examples of this. Before science understood what we do now about migration and how it happens, it seemed to many observers that birds simply vanished in the fall and reemerged in the spring from whatever hiding places they had used over the winter. One of the most bizarre theories about this involves the barnacle goose, a European species not unlike our own Canada goose, and oddly enough, one showed up here just outside of Rochester last week. Theorists back in the 500s saw barnacles along wharves and docks and on the bottoms of their boats, and they guessed that the geese transformed into little barnacles for the winter and adhered to all of these surfaces to wait out the cold weather. And in spring, when the weather got warmer, it gave them the cue they needed to change back. Now, back in 350 BC, Aristotle, of all people, the learned Greek philosopher, theorized that swallows, with their ability to dive so close to the surfaces of lakes and ponds, actually dove to the bottom of these lakes in fall and burrowed into the mud to wait out the winter. The whole oxygen thing was kind of lost on Aristotle and probably hadn't really come to the fore yet. So this theory actually held on, believe it or not, until the late 1700s, when sailors returning to Europe from warmer climates at the end of winter reported seeing flocks of swallows in Africa and managed to put two and two together. And then in 1822, an amazing thing happened. German villagers shot down a white stork that had a wooden spear piercing its neck. This is the actual stork that is in a German museum that's long since been taxidermied, but here it is. This spear's unusual wood could only have come from Africa. So, in a flash of insight, the German hunters realized that this bird must have flown all the way to Africa and all the way back. So, a single white stork finally changed the way ornithologists understood migration. That being said, so much of what people around the world attribute to birds has nothing at all to do with science. Wondrous parrots, like the imperial Amazon, the national bird of the Commonwealth of Dominica, or the African gray parrot, a very well-known bird among pet owners, are believed to have the ability to communicate with the spiritual realm. Not only can they fly high enough to reach the gods in the clouds, but they can actually form words. So you may need to watch what you say around one, or he may tattle to the ruling spirits, or worse, to your deceased relatives. And imagine what's going to be waiting for you when you get to the other side. One of our favorite North American birds, the anhinga, has represented different things to different cultures. We know that the bird's classic stance, holding its wings out from its sides to dry after it's dove for a fish dinner. Some Christians see this as symbolic of the crucifix, making the anhinga a perpetual reminder of the Passion of Christ and therefore selfless, forgiving, and holy. On the other hand, the indigenous Tupi people of Brazil gave the anhinga its name, which means devil bird in their language. They determined that the anhinga is a trickster and a troublemaker, and they decided this because the bird swims with its body submerged and only its head and neck out of the water, resembling a snake. So such a creature can't possibly be up to anything good, right? Now, here's one of my favorites. Two categories of birds, magpies and mynas, that require us to be especially respectful when we see them, asking after their health and their family's welfare. If we treat them with disdain or ignore them altogether, we may meet a particular fate based on how many of the birds we see at one time. There's even a nursery rhyme that makes this clear. One for sorrow, two for joy, three for a girl, four for a boy, five for silver, six for gold, seven for a secret never to be told. So whenever you see a mina or a magpie, be sure to greet it very warmly. Good afternoon, sir or miss. How are you today? Is your family well? If you're with a group and you don't want to look like a lunatic, just smile and nod or bow slightly. I'm told the bird will understand, and I certainly hope so, because when Nick and I were in Hawaii last year, which is loaded with minas, the minas there are like the starlings we have here. There I was, nodding and smiling and speaking to every darn mina I saw. I hope people didn't think I was nuts. Another of my favorite stories involves the common kingfisher, a gorgeous bright blue bird of the rivers and lakes of Europe, Southeast Asia, and parts of the Asian continent, and obviously a cousin of our own belted kingfisher. This is the tragic tale of Ceyx and Alcyone, two lovers in the days when Greek culture involved many gods living on Mount Olympus. Ceyx and Alcyone were soulmates, but equally important at the time, they were particularly well matched in physical beauty. This made the couple very popular with the gods, who observed their romance with great interest. The pair married and began a life together, and they were so happy that they gave each other little nicknames, as most married couples do. Unfortunately, they chose to call one another Zeus and Hera, the names of the two gods at the very top of the Greek pantheon. Well, instead of flattering Zeus, this made him very angry because Zeus was kind of a jerk. One day, when Ceyx boarded a ship to Ionia, Zeus kicked up a storm, and his wrath created a massive wave that swallowed up the ship. Ceyx drowned, and his body sank to the bottom of the sea. Well, Hera saw this and knew how devastated Alcyone would be if she never knew for certain what had happened to Ceyx. So as she watched the young woman wait on the shore and weep for him, Hera caused Ceyx's body to wash up right near where Alcyone waited for word of him. Alcyone, anguished by her loss, threw herself into the sea and drowned. Well, now Zeus felt remorse for the revenge he had exacted, so he resurrected them both from the dead and turned the two lovers into halcyon birds, naming them for Alcyone. Together, today we know them as common kingfishers, and every summer for 2 weeks, the winds grow calm so the kingfishers can nest on the beach and bring a brood into the world. We call these the halcyon days, a period of calm and happiness. And Alcyone remains part of the taxonomic name for several of the world's kingfishers. A little closer to home, have you ever wondered how goldfinches got their bright yellow color? Well, the Iroquois people certainly did, and the story has been passed down for generations. It seems that a fox chased a raccoon to make the little bandit its dinner. The raccoon ran up a tree, so the hungry fox waited all day at the bottom, but the raccoon, being no fool, did not come down. Well, eventually the fox dozed off, and when he awoke, he found that the raccoon was gone, but before it left, it painted the fox's eyes shut with tree resin. The resin had hardened and it wouldn't come off, so the fox was essentially blind. The fox called and called and called for help, and some drab little finches took pity on the crying fox, flew in, and pecked off the resin. Well, the fox thanked them for this good deed by using some yellow flowers nearby to color their plumage bright yellow, the color of sunshine. And the goldfinches wear this plumage with great pride all spring and summer to this day. And I chose Canada goldenrod, something that we all know is native to this part of New York State, as a possibility of what the fox used to color the goldfinches gold. Now, the story of the trapped fox and the helpful bird is one of the tales that shows up in the folklore of many different cultures, where it may be used to explain hummingbirds' iridescence or the bright color of a northern cardinal. So we can imagine people of many different tribes coming together thousands of years ago in meeting places like Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, Wupatki in Arizona, or in this place, now known as Aztec Ruins National Monument in New Mexico, all of which, by the way, are preserved by our National Park Service. Here they would come to trade goods and tell stories in kivas or in the shadows of ceremonial mounds, and one tribe might have an explanation for a specific thing that the others maybe hadn't explored yet. So that story would become part of another culture and another and be transformed over time. Now, let's turn to some of the bravest and the most superstitious people on the planet, the people who ply their trade on ships at sea. Entire books have been written about the omens and the portents brought by pelagic birds over boats filled with sailors, fishermen, and explorers. Seafarers especially revere the albatross, any of the 22 species of these magnificent birds, including this Laysan albatross we were fortunate to see in Hawaii last year. For centuries, having an albatross around your neck has been synonymous with carrying a weighty burden that we can't wait to dispose of. This expression, of course, comes from Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which I will not recite for you today. But in it, we learn that killing an albatross is the worst luck of all bad luck, inviting shipwreck and certain death. So how do we counteract this bad omen? The person who killed the bird has to wear it on a rope around their neck, literally carrying the burden of their misdeed. Now, an albatross can weigh as much as 18 pounds, so this penance is nothing to take lightly. But albatross lore on the high seas can govern the lives of sailors with endless speculation of whether an albatross following ship is a good omen with a promise of the bird's protection or a bad omen of an oncoming storm. with the bird hiding behind the ship to avoid the worst of it. Whichever it turns out to be, there's another twist. The albatross most likely carries the soul of a sailor lost at sea. So whether it's good news or bad news, the bird's protection or its warning are all meant with the best of intentions. Now, Coleridge's poem dominates seabird lore, so it may seem that albatrosses are the only birds that affect a sailor's fortune. But the family of northern storm petrels also carries considerable weight with seafarers. The storm part of the name comes from their habit of taking refuge from an oncoming gale by following closely behind a ship and letting the large structure, and in the old days, the sails, block the worst of the weather. So sailors took this as a dependable warning that a storm was on its way. But some thought that the birds actually brought the stormy weather with them, making a flock of storm petrels at a ship's stern a very worrisome sight. Unless you're chumming and you're on a pelagic trip and you want to see them back there. In fact, some seafarers went so far as to call it good luck if a storm petrel happened to defecate on them as it passed over them, which makes this a good time to remind you of the cardinal rule of birding: never look up with your mouth open. Now, killing a storm petrel, even in retaliation for the defecation, was and is still considered bad luck, as if the shooter wishes to invite bad weather for a very long stay. So, if you want to find yourself caught at sea in the middle of a hurricane, all you got to do is shoot down a storm petrel. And as long as we're on the subject of disgusting things people do at sea, fishermen of old observed gray herons standing patiently waiting for fish to swim by at just the right distance and decided there must be something about the heron's feet that attracted the fish. So they carried a heron's foot to improve their luck in fishing. And some even coated their fishing lines with a noxious goo they made from heron's fat and feet. As this practice has faded, we can assume it was not only very offensive, but probably not effective at all. I also learned some fairly dark things about birds' lives, and I made a point of including these in the book as well because readers need to know that some of the world's birds face challenges from people with very selfish ends. The parrots of the Caribbean islands, for example, have been poached nearly to death for the black market on pet birds. Some of these islands have moved to name these birds as their national symbols, which has released funds and organized efforts to save them. But on some of these islands, it's virtually impossible to see the parrots that were once abundant there. You need special permission to go into wildlife refuges that have highly elevated levels of protection. And then we have the fate of the ortolan, a tiny bird that has had the bad luck of becoming a delicacy in parts of Europe. The recipe is gruesome. They fatten the bird up in a cage for more than 3 weeks and then actually kill it by drowning it in Armagnac brandy. The chef then cooks it and serves it whole, and the gourmands who eat the ortolan pop it down in one bite, but first they toss a napkin over their heads so they won't be seen stuffing their faces with this little morsel. Only the bill remains on the plate when they're finished. I'm glad to report that the European Union has banned this practice, but there are still corners of Europe where the name ortolan makes mouths water. Now, finally, let's talk about birds that don't exist. As we have seen, long before we began to understand birds in scientific terms, miraculous flying creatures became part of nearly every culture's mythology. Sometimes, though, the powers of actual living birds simply did not rise to the level that gods and storytellers required, so birds needed to do something more. Meld with the body of a god or a goddess, for example, or become the lead character in a myth so vivid that it needs a supernatural species to tell it. Though creating birds that have supernatural powers makes them larger than life, allowing us to attach all manner of deeds and stories to them. And this makes these mythical birds the catalyst for just about any situation that requires an explanation beyond the ordinary. They may be able to heal the sick, determine if crops will thrive or wither, bestow happy marriages and fidelity on lucky couples, bring good luck and prosperity, or guide people to new lands where they can build their capital city. In Egypt, the god Tot takes on the mantle of a bird, specifically an African sacred ibis, while he controls the passage of time and the change of seasons. Tot is the god of the moon, wisdom, writing, hieroglyphics, science, magic, and art, so he's a busy dude. The ibis head allows him to change the pace of the passage of time, giving himself more time to get all these tasks done. On the flip side of this benevolence, a mythical bird called an ouslam provides an excuse for foolishness, shifting the blame for mistakes away from humans and onto a bird way too silly to behave itself. In British and Australian legend, ouslam flies in a spiral of circles tighter and tighter until it eventually flies up its own butt. I'm guessing that everyone listening knows an ouslam or two in their lives. And here's the Feng Huang, or Chinese phoenix, one of China's 12 ornaments or ancient symbols that denote the power and authority of the people who wear them. The ornaments date back at least to 2294 BC and perhaps much earlier than that. They're embroidered on the clothing of high-ranking people in Chinese society. The description of this beast has changed over the millennia, so this one follows some of the more recent depictions, more or less. A golden pheasant's head, a mandarin duck's body, a peacock's tail, a crane's legs, and a parrot's bill. Wherever the Feng Huang appears, it implies the virtue and honesty of the people it adorns. So it often appears at weddings as a blessing of fidelity and harmony. And in some households, they bring it out to display it in good times. And when things get tough, they put it away. Now, exactly how and where we acquired the legend of the phoenix has been a subject of debate for thousands of years. It appears long before Greek mythology cemented this story of an immortal bird who eventually tired of his cushy life in paradise. Phoenix traveled to the mortal world where things lived and died, but the phoenix knew that he would always remain immortal. Well, one night, Phoenix built a nest of twigs, and as he waited for Apollo, the sun god, to arrive, he began to sing. Morning came, and Apollo passed over in his golden chariot. But the sun god so admired Phoenix's song that he actually stopped in midair to listen, and the sun stood still. As he enjoyed the song, a spark from the sun dropped down onto Phoenix's nest of twigs. The nest ignited, and Phoenix burst into flame, dissolving into ashes. All was not lost for Phoenix, however. 3 days later, the magical bird sprang up from the ashes, young and renewed. The bird realized that he could do this again and again, but somehow he understood he would have to wait 1,000 years before his next renewal. So he continues to repeat this cycle of death and rebirth as he will for eternity. So that's the complete language of birds, with stories about nearly 400 species of birds around the world. It's illustrated rather than photographic, as you've seen, with vintage drawings from a wide range of artists, mostly of the 19th and early 20th centuries. The cover is obviously an Audubon illustration, and there are several others in the book. This was an utter delight to research and write. It combines my love of birds, natural science, and history, and I hope it's as much fun for you as it was for me. So thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you today, and I am happy to take your questions.
Randy, I was going to ask you, how do we acquire your book? But it looks like you covered that on the last slide.
Well, yeah, you can get it from me. this QR code will take you right to my website where you can buy it there. But you can also it's very widely distributed. You can buy this on any online merchant that you usually buy your books from.
Terrific.
Randy, I'm glad you got finally to the Phoenix. Because,
Yeah.
at this very moment, I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. Uh, and I actually had thought about, why is Phoenix, where did its name derive? And I did a little preliminary research, and I didn't actually find an answer yet, but I'm going to continue. I presume it's because the city, the town originally, had its ups and downs. It came to life and then it died away. The mining was a big industry, and now it's certainly now it's a major successful city. So I guess the name is fitting. But yeah, thank you for getting to the Phoenix.
Oh, sure. And I can't help but wonder if part of the reason Phoenix, Arizona is called Phoenix is because of the heat.
Oh,
Um,
that hadn't crossed my mind, but yeah, definitely.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, probably has some of that. But yes, that rebirth, that's the theme that comes up really over and over again in mythology. But the phoenix bird really cemented it as its trademark.
Hmm. Good.
Terrific.
Let's see. We do have a question here from Amy Elise. What is your spark bird? I presume you know that term.
I certainly do. And
Maybe
believe
you
it or
could
not,
explain it for people
oh, sure. Sparkbird is the bird that attracted you to birding. That was the one thing that all of a sudden your passion for birds took off because you saw this bird. And believe it or not, for me it was the house finch. I had spent the early part of my career working in the theater, and while not on stage, but the working in the theater is all evenings and weekends and overtime, and it's very consuming. And when I left that for the private sector, all of a sudden I had my evenings and weekends free, and I didn't know what to do with myself. And my husband and his mom used to go birding, and so he said to me, let's put up a bird feeder. Maybe you'd like birding. And we put up a bird feeder, and in 20 minutes, I had two house finches on it. And I'd never seen house finches before. They're pink. Oh my God, they're pink. And I went nuts and started going on field trips with the Birding Association, and it took off for me. So I'm very grateful, all these years later to have had that opportunity with just a couple little house finches.
Yeah, that's a great story. And yeah, so many people have similar tales of their spark bird. Yeah.
Yes,
Maybe we should do a program sometime just everybody talk about their spark bird.
that'd be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
making a note.
Yeah. All right. Well, if there are no further questions, a big thank you to Randy, and a fascinating topic. And you got that job done in 6 months uh, very well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Uh,
thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to talk with you, and
yep.
I hope to run into you all in the field one day.
Yep. And by the way,
Thank
we're
you.
having a lot of thank yous come in over the chat, so
Oh, great.
people
Okay.
appreciate it. Yeah.
And thank you for not just a fascinating program, but a few good laughs too, Randy.
Oh, sure.
Thank you
Well, you
very, very
gotta,
much.
yeah, you gotta laugh.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks. Take good
Okay.
care. We appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Bye bye.
Good
Bye
night,
bye.
everyone.